Hi, everyone. Welcome to Research on the Road.
Oh, hey everybody. Like she said, welcome to Research on the Road. I'm Wildman Dan, and this is Research on the Road. We're going to be talking about eggs today since it is getting close to Easter. So we've got Emily, we've got Michael, and we've got myself. And I can't wait for you guys to get a little bit of this information. I'm going to go ahead and start off. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, and we're going to take a look at a beautiful gecko species that I absolutely love. Anybody? All right, cool. So today I'm going to be talking about a gecko species called the Satanic leaf-tailed gecko, also known in its scientific name as Uroplatus fantasticus. Now, for those of you that you guys don't know, I am a huge herpetologist. I love reptiles, but this has got to be one of my favorite gecko species in the entire world, and I will show you why right now. Okay, that is not how you click next. There it is. This is why. I mean, just look at that animal. Just absolutely stunning and gorgeous. This is the Satanic leaf-tailed gecko. And if you haven't figured it out, it's called that because of that beautiful leaf back there. And now the satanic portion comes because of those gorgeous horns right there above the eyes. Now, these two individuals right here were actually my very first specimen. They come from Madagascar, and they're just a beautiful, tiny specimen of leaf geckos. Now, there's multiple varieties of these animals. There's Helleri, Fimbriatus, and a couple other different species. But Fantasticus has definitely got to be my favorite, just because of how beautifully camouflaged they are. But we're going to talk about how these guys breed and what they do with their eggs and how long those eggs actually take to incubate in captivity and also in the wild. So this right here was my entire collection. I had 7 satanic leaf-tailed geckos in total. Up top, you can see 4 females, and at the bottom are 3 males. Now, usually you can distinguish the males from females because females don't have little notches in the tail, while all of the males usually do. Now, I say usually because in biology, as we all know, nothing is 100% certain all the time. There is always something that is different or doesn't apply to all of the species or a specific group of them. So once in a while, you do actually end up with females that have notches in the tail, but still really cool, just beautiful. And you could just see how incredible these guys look. Now I'm going to show you guys my favorite animal. This one was, his name was Nito, my favorite male gecko. And you guys can see just why. He looks just so awesome. Oh, with the dead leaf coloration and his underbelly as well. Just a beautiful animal. And there's another photo of him right in a white background. Gorgeous. So here's my first trio that I ever got. I got 2 males and 1 female. The female is there hanging upside down, and the 2 males are on top. For these guys, I did do a vivarium, which means I had live plants in the enclosure, and I kept the temperature around 68 to 72. I never wanted to get too much hotter than that because these animals can't take those high temperatures. And especially for breeding, you want to make sure they're at those lower temperatures as well. Now, you can find these animals in any variety of these ways. The majority of the time, you'll find them upside down, waiting for something to crawl underneath so that they can jump on them and eat it. So this was the first time I was able to actually successfully capture them breeding. Here you can see the male, which is latched onto the back of the female. The female is much larger than this male right here. And what the male will do is he'll bite the neck of the female to hold her in place. He'll grab on with his legs, and then he'll wrap that tail of his around her leg in order to hold her in place. Once that happens, we get a little cloaca touching, and we are making babies. For eggs. We're making eggs. A little bit later, you'll end up with an egg. Now, usually the species will drop anywhere from 1 to 2 eggs, and I believe it's every month, but only for like 3 or 4 months. So the most eggs that you can probably get within a breeding season, I think somebody had 12 eggs total. So that was 6 individual times. Sometimes females will only drop 1 egg. This all depends. But this was actually 1 egg that I did actually successfully get. Unfortunately, I was not able to successfully hatch it, but still pretty cool that I got it. Finally, we have some other specimens that I have here. But before we get into that, I'm going to show you guys some videos of other people's Uroplatus who were actually successful at hatching these eggs. So let me go ahead and exit here. And we're going to hop over here to our YouTube channel. I'm going to open this a little bit larger, and we are going to start off with right here where we have a Mr. Matt Ken, who reported his female Europlatus fantastic is actually laying an egg, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit. And wait, pause. I'm going to mute it here. So what's happening right now, here she is. She's actually getting ready to actually lay the egg completely. Usually females will not bury them underneath the dirt, but they'll hide them underneath leaves or any debris. And they'll actually catch it with their back legs. And as they catch it, the egg is still soft, so it still has time to calcify. So that means it gets harder. And what she'll do is she'll actually roll it into a beautiful ball. So instead of that normal egg shape that you actually get like a perfect sphere. And here you're going to go ahead and see, and here she goes. She's starting to roll that egg. She's getting a bunch of dirt on top of it and stuff so that it kind of camouflages with the environment around them. But look at how gentle and careful she is with that egg. These animals are caring mothers for their offspring, at least for the egg portion. After that, the babies are on their own. But you can see how she's being so delicate with those back legs. Next, we're going to go ahead and move on to one of my favorite guys. His name is Reptilatus. You guys should totally follow him on social media. He was probably one of the first individuals to capture a Europlatus fantasticus actually hatching out of the egg. And it's kind of fast, so make sure you guys are watching. Boop, and there it is. So that little tiny itty bitty guy is a Europlatus fantasticus hatching straight out of the egg. You can see how slimy and gross he is. Still super cute in my opinion. But you see how that egg is nice and hard? So it's a hard-shelled egg, unlike bearded dragons, which is more like leather. And it just, poof, pops right out. And then it starts to climb around. And what it first needs to do is get its shed off. That's the first thing. And now we're going to move on to the last video that I have here, which is where Reptilatus here is actually showing us some of his babies that he hatched on his own. So there's a beautiful little guy right there, and you can see all that white around him. That's that first shed that needs to come off. This guy was actually successful in removing that shed. That's really important for these species in order to survive. They have to go through that first shed. If not, it sticks to them too hard, and it gets tighter and tighter, and they won't survive. But they usually take about 90 to 120 days to incubate. So it's a really, really long time to wait, trust me. But still, just a beautiful, beautiful species. And there we have it. And that's the cycle of the satanic leaf-tailed gecko. And I'll show you guys just a few more pictures of the rest of my animals that I had. Some better shots. This one was probably the darkest male that I had in my collection. I had another female who was just absolutely stunning. There's that male again. You can see those horns on top of the eye. Just a beautiful species. There's that little girl. You can see they're not very big. They're probably about 2 inches. So the babies are just about the size of your nail. They're so tiny and fragile. And there's my chunky little female again. You can see how girthy she is compared to the other males. But yeah, so that's the Europlatus fantasticus species. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And trust me when I tell you, if you ever get a chance to get to Madagascar and see these animals in real life, or you end up with them in your collection, they're totally worth every second of it. They're expensive, but one day I'll get them all back one of these days soon. But thanks so much, guys. I'll pass it on to Emily or Michael, and you guys take care. And thanks for joining us on Research on the Road.
Thank you.
All right, well, I'll take over from there. So from Daniel, we heard about the reptile egg and how it has the calcified shell. And so I'm taking a slight back step. We'll hear more about that from Michael. Apologies. So
thank you.
Okay. From Daniel, we heard about the calcified reptile shell, so a hardened shell. And so I'm taking a back step to a nice soft shell, and we're going to talk about fish today, or specifically we're going to talk about aquatic animals, and then with a focus on fish. So I'm talking about Easter eggs beneath the waves. And to start out, I want to talk a little bit about how fish parenting works. And that's kind of counterintuitive. You don't really think of fish. I mean, they are parents in the biological sense. They are less so in the sense that we think of as being parental. Uh, for and most fish and most aquatic species, really, taking care of babies is not something that they do. At least, apart from the mammals, the marine mammals and aquatic mammals, of course, have more in-depth parental care. But as far as the fish and invertebrates go, they're not the most attentive parents. And much of the time, the way that they breed is actually just to broadcast spawn, and that just means dispersing gametes and hoping that they'll come together, fertilized eggs, and flow out to sea. So a lot of what we think of as a lot of what we call plankton is actually eggs and babies. Plankton is a really broad term. It's just anything that is floating through the water column. So while much the majority of plankton is phytoplankton and is photosynthetic, the zooplankton, the animal plankton, is much of it is eggs and larvae of fish, crustaceans, echinoderms, mollusks, any of these broadcast spawners. So when we're talking about meroplankton, we're narrowing down the category of plankton into specifically the eggs and larvae of fish and invertebrates. And then when we narrow that down even further to fish specific, we're talking about ichthyoplankton. So there's this great website, larvalbase.org, and it's part of the fish base, but they needed a way to help researchers identify these fish eggs and larvae that they're filtering out through the plankton. So there's many studies that are collecting plankton and categorizing it into what it is, the components of it. But there was not a good way of having a database of exactly what fish and what fish larvae look like. So for corals, going back to the invertebrates, they synchronize their spawning events, and this is mostly species specific. You'll find it as species want to time their breeding, their mass spawning, so that there's the greatest chance of their gametes coming together and forming a functional offspring. So the species of coral will base their specific timing on the cycle of the moon and season of the year. So and it depends on which tropical reef you're on or what coral system you're in and what species you're talking about, but they will all synchronize and release their eggs and sperm at once, and it's quite a sight. And researchers gather and go out at night specifically to watch these. As in the image here, you can see these are our corals just dispersing eggs, and they'll just all float into the water column. The fish seem to know, the predators kind of take advantage of this as well. They understand the timing of things, and they'll come through and filter through as well. But it's just that they have a maximum likelihood if they're all doing it at once, because even if predators pick off a good proportion of these eggs that they're just releasing out into the ocean, there's a very good chance that some will survive, and only a few need to survive to continue the species. And the advantages of broadcast spawning is better mixing of genes. You're not restricted to any one partnership. There's higher genetic diversity. The parents don't actually have to put any energy input in. They don't have to worry about providing food or anything to the offspring. It's just, we made the eggs, off you go, hope for the best. And of course, like I said, with the synchronization is that the individual chance of predation is reduced if there's a whole lot of prey items to choose from. So if there's 1,000 eggs, the predators can only eat 500 of them, and hey, there's 500 that are still going to survive. And so you're kind of flooding the market. You're making it so that there's too much for any predators to consume. And of course, when we're talking about corals or any species that doesn't actually move, they are anchored to their position. This is the best way to disperse their gametes. There's very few alternative options for them. And when you're in a medium like water, it facilitates that. It's this sort of the same way that flowers disperse pollen. But in the water column, they can actually disperse eggs and sperm, and the water will facilitate that. So then it's synchronization is important, but it's not always quite as simple as just picking a place, or just having everyone in one place. Rather, it's not always simple to get everyone together. So there's specific lifestyles like anadromous, and that's where we are talking about salmon, where they're born in freshwater, they spend their entire life out in the ocean, and then when they go to breed again, they're going back to freshwater. So they all synchronize. They know at what point in their lifestyle, at their life history, that they will return to where they were born, and then they are going to spawn there again, so that their offspring are coming from the same place. The reverse of that is called catadromous, and that's where something like an eel is actually a freshwater organism, but they all head out to sea, find one spot in the ocean where they all gather, mate, and then when the offspring are born, they all head back to the rivers. So now we're going to talk specifically about fish parenting. There's several very specific instances where this place. One of them is discus fish. So this is an aquarium fish. They're very popular, and freshwater aquariums. And so these parents are so invested in their offspring that they don't just protect the eggs and care for the eggs, but they actually continue to take care of the babies once they've hatched, which is a rare exception in the world of fish. They actually secrete mucus along their body that the young can feed on. It's almost like how a mammal provides milk. They are providing food for their babies to continue to eat, even past the point of hatching. So you can see the little larvae, our little baby fish. They are attaching to the side of the parent, and they'll stay there for 2 weeks or so, get enough food to be able to survive on their own and go out and become their own person, their own fish. So another type that we would think more of when we're talking about eggs is nests. And so there's a few examples of fish that make nests. One, again, is a popular aquarium fish, the betta. And so betta actually use bubble nests. And so this is a male and a female. They're a little bit dimorphic, which we talked about a few weeks ago, how the male and the female are different. The male's a bit more ornamental and luxurious, and the female is still beautiful, but a little bit less flashy about it. And so in the wild, these betta fish, they don't live in a nice filtered aquarium. They live in typically puddles that are not so well oxygenated. There's not a lot of water flow. There's not a lot of circulation. So the best way for them to get oxygen to their babies is to have them at the surface. And so the eggs need to be constantly oxygenated, have gas exchange so that the babies can develop properly. And so they'll make these bubble nests that stick up to the surface so that it keeps the eggs in place and also gives the eggs a source of oxygen. And the males build the nest and they guard the nest. The females are there only to provide the eggs, and then they're gone. They're not that interested. So here's a bubble nest, and here's the little fry, the little larvae that are hanging on to it as they're hatching. So there's some eggs in there, and as they hatch, these are the little larvae that come out. anemone fish, of course, clownfish, our favorite of the nesters among the fish, are saltwater marine fish that the male and the female both share in the parenting. And so there's actually it's a complicated story in the terms of what a partnership between male and female clownfish look like. It's more of a group than it is a male female partnership. But the male and female that have bred, that have produced these eggs, they'll lay them near an anemone, which is their home, which is their preferred place to live and protect themselves. And they can lay, these tiny, tiny fish can lay 600 to 1,500 3 to 4 millimeter eggs. And that is dependent on the size of the female, because females are typically larger than males with clownfish, and bigger species produce more eggs, and bigger individuals of that species will produce more eggs as well. But they'll stick them to a rock very close to their anemone, and then they'll guard them, and they'll take very good care of them. And taking care of them doesn't just mean guarding them. It means being attentive and raising them and flowing their fins over them and picking over them and making sure that they are well. So for 7 days, predominantly the male clownfish will take eggs by fanning his tail or his fins over them to get more water flow. Like we said with the beta, they need oxygen, they need water flow, they need circulation. And so the more devoted this dad is, the better success of the offspring. And then once they hatch, they'll spend the first 2 to 3 weeks in the water column. They disperse. There's no post-hatching care. There's just quite a bit of investment pre-hatching. And then they'll go find their own anemone and form their own partnership or group and continue onward. A weird example in fish are mouth brooders. And there's a surprising many species that do this, both in freshwater and marine systems. And so they, once the eggs are fertilized and laid, the father typically, not always, will scoop them up in the mouth, and they don't eat. They just hold those babies there until they hatch. They are fully invested, and they are taking no chance with the predators taking their nests while their back is turned. They are going to carry them until they hatch. And so there's paternal mouth brooders, which are when the males scoop them up and carry them around. And then there are maternal mouth brooders, which is when it's the females. And those eggs are as well protected as they can be by that parent, because they're going to take that protection as seriously as they take their own life. And then, of course, seahorse, we don't think of them as fish, but they are fish. And that's similar to the mouth brooders, except it gives them the chance to continue eating, which is nice. The male is still going to have to carry these eggs around with him until they hatch, but at least they're not in his mouth taking up space that he could use to put food in. So the male seahorse has a specialized pouch in its belly area, and it carries those eggs, and then they hatch out as fully formed teeny tiny seahorses, just like this picture shows. And there they are. They pop out quite a few of them, and they all come flowing out, and there they go. Off they go. Again, no after hatching parental care, but they are fully formed seahorses and are capable of taking care of themselves as soon as they leave the father. So there we are. Hope you enjoyed learning about fish parenting, and I'm gonna toss it over to Michael.
Let me pull up my PowerPoint here. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about eggs through the ages, the fossil record of the amniote egg. Now, you might not be familiar with that term, amniote, so I'm going to break it down for you. So today I'm mostly going to talk about vertebrate eggs because I don't know that much about invertebrates in general. They're just not my thing. And invertebrates, most of them lay eggs, and some I'm sure do give birth to live young. And vertebrates, we see the same thing. So a lot of vertebrates will lay eggs. And so vertebrates, that's animals with backbones, including amphibians, fish, mammals, reptiles, all those guys that you're familiar with. So vertebrates can be divided into two main groups based on basically what their eggs are like. So on one hand, you have anamniotes, and those are fish and amphibians. Their eggs are soft and jelly-like and don't have a shell like you do on like a chicken egg that you have in your fridge. Amniotes, on the other hand, include reptiles, which includes birds and dinosaurs, as well as mammals. Mammals are not reptiles; they're a different group. But even though they don't lay eggs, most of them don't lay eggs. Mammals are considered amniotes because amniotes refers to the amnion, which is a special membrane within the egg that it's like a little sac that contains the embryo, and that prevents or that protects the embryo from being jostled around when I shake this egg here, and it also helps keep enough water in the egg at all times. And so what's really important about amnio eggs is they don't have to be laid in the water, because fish eggs and amphibian eggs, because they're soft and don't have a hard shell, they have to be laid in the water. Otherwise, they're going to dry out really, really easily. There are some exceptions to, some amphibians will lay eggs like in trees on leaves and stuff. Some frogs do. But even then, they make like a kind of a foam nest. So there's still a constant exchange of water there. But when the amniote egg evolved, when you get this hard shell and the amnion that prevents water loss, then you can start moving away from the water and you're not as dependent on living in the water your whole life. And so the amnion prevents water loss, and the hard shell still allows the egg to absorb oxygen and expel carbon dioxide. So a question that I cannot help but address here is the rhetorical question, which came first, the chicken or the egg? And a lot of people see this as just, a turn of phrase that no one looks too much into it, but paleontologists have looked into this, and we can say with certainty that the egg came first. And here's why. So chickens are, like we talked about, like other birds and mammals and reptiles, are amniotes. They have an amnion, they have a hard shell. And the first amniote egg appeared about 310, 320 million years ago, back in the Carboniferous period. And chickens don't appear until way later, just about 12,000 years ago. So the egg predates the chicken by about 310 million years. Now, I'm going to go into some examples of eggs in the fossil record that we see. First up is invertebrates, just to get them out of the way, because, they're invertebrates. But there are some pretty cool things you can find here. So first we have ammonites, which they're probably one of the more popular fossil invertebrates that we don't have around anymore. They're basically a cephalopod, a squid-like animal inside a coiled shell. They kind of look like a nautilus, but they were still pretty different. And I didn't know until I was preparing for this talk, but we actually have a small number of specimens of ammonite eggs and other cephalopod eggs. And this is not the type of thing that you would expect to be preserved very often. I have some fish eggs in the next slide to show you a more typical preservation, but this 3D preservation of soft eggs is not common. It's just, you usually need a hard part to be preserved well, whether it's a bone or tooth or egg. And so 3D soft tissue preservation like this is incredibly, exceedingly rare. Likewise, we also have some eggs of trilobites, and this is only discovered in the mid-2010s, but in upstate New York, there are some trilobite beds that have been preserved with iron pyrite, and this allows some very, very, very fine, detailed preservation, including all these little legs, gills, antenna, and we found out because of these discoveries that they actually carried their eggs up near their gills by their head. Here is an image of fish eggs. So it doesn't look like much. If you found this in the field, you'd probably kind of pass over it because it just looks like, random pitting from rain or acid or something like that. But these are fish eggs. And this is what I meant by this is more typical for soft tissue where it's just kind of preserved like the imprints of it rather than the 3D preserved ammonite eggs we saw here. So not super interesting. We do have eggs of some other fish like this. Now, when you see these fossils, you might think that, oh, there's a pine cone here or something, like a seed pod here, and a weird kind of fish, maybe. But these are actually all egg cases of different kinds of sharks. And if you've ever walked along the beach, especially Rocky Coast or here in Southern California, you might find these things. They're called like mermaid's purses or devil's purses, and they are the egg cases of horn sharks. And so there are a lot of different sharks that both lay eggs or give live birth. But we do find egg cases similar to this all the way back through the fossil record, which is pretty cool. Now on to probably the highlight of this presentation are the dinosaur eggs. So these are probably the most well-known fossilized reptile eggs. And that's because, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of reptiles, the eggs have soft leathery shells, like alligators, lizards, turtles. They all have very soft, squishy shells. But dinosaurs, just like modern day birds, have hard shells. You can tap them. Dinosaur eggs were very diverse in size, shape, color, etc. So there are two general shapes when we're looking at dinosaur eggs. You have the spherical, like very rounded eggs, and sometimes you have football-shaped eggs, which fall into the more elongate category. So the more traditional egg shape. And generally speaking, this is very general, the longer elongate eggs belong to the theropod dinosaurs. The theropods are the bipedal, carnivorous, meat-eating animals, while the more rounded eggs belong to the plant eaters like sauropods or duckbill dinosaurs, and the horned dinosaurs. Generally speaking, past that very broad generalization, it can be difficult, if not impossible, to tell what dinosaur a particular egg came from, unless, in the rare case, that you actually have an embryo preserved inside the egg, which does happen sometimes. There are a number of features of dinosaur eggs that can tell us a lot about nesting behaviors and past environments, such as there are about half a dozen different core systems. So if you take a microscope and look really closely at an egg, you will see that it has little holes all through it. And those holes allow the exchange of gases and waste and so forth. Dinosaur eggs had different kinds of core systems. They had 1, 2, or 3 layers, depending on the species. There were different patterns of dinosaur eggs. So unlike a chicken egg, it's very smooth. Some dinosaur eggs had different bumps or patterns of ridges, and that would have varied depending on the species. And all of these things can give us insight into not only what the past environments were like and climates, but also maybe how these eggs were laid. So, for example, eggs that were buried in sediment have a higher rate of gas conductance than those laid out in the open. Eggs that are laid in the desert and very dry environments have a lower gas conductance because they need to keep as much water in there as possible. And if they had a higher gas exchange rate, then they would lose a lot of water. So you're going to see less gas conductance when it was laid, when the animal lived in a dry desert-like environment. And like I say here, in some very, I don't want to say exceedingly rare, some new technology has shown us what color some dinosaur eggs were. So it's basically we're taking a laser and bouncing it off the eggshell and letting the computers do the work and figuring out the properties of these eggs. And we find out that just like in modern birds, dinosaur eggs were varied. So in my background here, you can see some of these theropod dinosaurs had like blue eggs, like bright or like deep blue eggs. Others had more of a green or like a mottled brown, like this chicken egg I'm holding here. Others were not colored and were just white, just like your standard chicken egg or alligator eggs or a lot of other reptiles today. So all of these things vary a lot within Dinosauria. Something else that varies is the size of nesting sites. So there aren't a whole lot of dinosaur nesting sites known that are actually complete nesting sites, but we do have some. So there are a number of them in South America, and these were laid by dinosaurs called titanosaurs. Titanosaurs were the long-necked sauropod dinosaurs. They had very round spherical eggs. And these nesting sites have hundreds of eggs, and all the eggshells are trampled in very small pieces, or a lot of the eggs are, which suggests that the babies had hatched and were starting to walk around the nest a little bit by the time that it was fossilized. So here we have a couple different types of dinosaur eggs. So the type on the left are theropod eggs. So the meat-eating dinosaurs have those longer, stretched-out eggs, while the egg on the right belongs to a sauropod dinosaur. I could talk about the very, very round eggs. You don't see spheres in nature very often, but this is surprisingly spherical. Further, you can see on the right here, we have the different, we can see the different pore types and eggshell types. So you can see some ridges on this one in the lower left. The lower right, it has lots of little bumps and nodes all over it. And the one on top here is pretty smooth. Now, just this month, I think it was earlier this month, we found a once-in-a-lifetime discovery, and that was a dinosaur that was actually on top of its nest. So what probably happened was this animal saw a big sandstorm coming, because this animal this Oviraptorosaur lived in a very dry environment, like very arid. And so it probably saw something like a sandstorm coming. And so in a last-ditch effort, it was trying to protect its nest, and then the whole thing was buried. And it's truly an absolutely mind-blowing discovery. And so these guys laid clutches that were maybe about a dozen and a half in size. But in some other dinosaur nesting sites are incredibly massive. So we don't know what kind of dinosaur laid them yet, last I checked. But in Spain, there is a dinosaur nesting site that was, it's what remains of an ancient beach. And beaches are apparently very good areas to lay your eggs, as modern turtles will profess, because this dinosaur nesting site had over 300,000 dinosaur eggs present. And that's a staggering amount. And so it's not like, that's probably not one season, it's probably, a few different generations of individuals. But that suggests that there were at least thousands and thousands of animals that migrated to these locations to lay their eggs every year. Moving on to my area of expertise, pterosaurs. Pterosaur eggs, we are learning more and more about. Until the mid-2000s, we knew basically nothing about these things. But some key discoveries have given us insight in the past 10 years. So we know that just like most modern day reptiles, pterosaur eggshells were soft and leathery. And so this picture on the right is from a pterosaur called Hemipterus. This was found in an entire nesting site that was described in, I want to say 2014 or 2016. And you can kind of see how this egg is indented as a fossil. So we can tell it was a soft shell egg. But not only did we find a bunch of pterosaur eggs, which is impressive in and of itself, you can see a whole nesting site here with some adults surrounding it. But in some of these eggs, we actually have embryos preserved. We have baby pterosaurs inside these eggs. And so these are teeny, teeny, tiny bones here. But this studying these very young pterosaurs, not even hatched pterosaurs, can give us insight into how they developed inside the egg and how big they were when they hatched, how developed they were when they hatched. And so because of things like this, we actually think that pterosaurs were ready to fly as soon as they hatched, unlike modern birds, which have to stay in the nest for like several weeks at least before they even start to flap. Pterosaurs could take off probably within a few hours after they hatched from an egg. Now, how many eggs could pterosaurs lay? And this applies to dinosaurs or any animal, really, that we looked at today, really. But for any of these animals, the clutch size would depend on what species you're looking at. So obviously, bigger individuals probably can lay more eggs because they have more space for it. Whereas smaller species like Darwinopterus here probably only laid one or two eggs at a time. And we can say that with pretty good confidence because, as you can see here, this animal is actually preserved with an egg just coming out of it. And so you might think at first like, oh, it died right after it laid this egg, but what is more likely is that this egg was actually developing inside the mother. And then when the mother was killed and buried by sediment and the sediment pressed down on the body, the egg probably just popped right out. And so species like Darwinopterus laid probably maybe just one. I could see it being up to 2 eggs at a time. And so that is all I have for you today.
All right, awesome. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed learning about the different types of eggs. They're not all coming from a chicken or some kind of poultry. Yeah. Happy Easter to everyone, and we'll see you again next week. Bye.